I had this impression from what I heard before, what I read in Uncommon Therapy by J. Haley, and so, this is a guy, very powerful, very strategically oriented, very always planning how he could irritate or make you confused and then put you in a trance, and you maybe even don't know what you are doing. And I was really convinced that he can put everybody in trance, but not me. So that was my attitude going there. But when I got to know him, it was totally different. In a sense, it was for me, in a sense, confusingly touching, in a sense that I had this impression. Seldom in my life, I think even almost never, I had this experience that there's a human being in such a presence, perceiving me and being there. So when I talked with him, I had always this feeling, I feel seen, being seen and being, you are here, you are, the way you are, it's really important to perceive you and be present with you in on every sensory level, I guess it was touched.
One of the deepest ways that he touched a lot of people, I don't think we would still be talking about him, 40 plus years afterwards if it weren't for that really deep human touching. I mean, I know, I won't mention any names, but other therapists from that era who were really well known, who I don't hear people talk about anymore. And because they had sort of an interesting intellectual theory, but I think what Erickson had also was this profound way to touch people at a human level and in some very special ways that, I think those of us for whom that happened probably will remember that as some of the most important experiences I will my whole lifetime.
That was my impression. It was sometimes so amazing, also in a sense irritating, but in a positively way, irritating in a positive way, that I had this feeling, he looks at me and he means me. He's interested in me, not as a client or as a trainee or so, as somebody, so it changed my self-image as well. So in a sense, obviously he sees things in me as if I would be valuable and interesting, more than I thought. And then it in a sense was surprising how this guy, obviously world famous and so competent, how can he have this image of me? Maybe there is something which I should go into contact with. It was really, without any word, it was a non-verbal processing that was interesting.
I was also curious when you said you, with the Sterling group, and had these systemic ideas, and that you had some idea about Erickson as you came in. What was the idea that you were carrying about Erickson? I mean, you said he was somebody who was more controlling things, but one of the most interesting things all the way back at the beginning for me was how many different theoretical perspectives people had about him. You could read, say, J. Haley's books about Erickson, and then you read Ernie Rossi's books, just as two examples, and look and say, they're not really talking about the same
man. Yeah.
And in some way, that's one of the most interesting phenomena. So which of those templates were you mainly carrying into those first connections?
The first connections before I met him have been very much influenced by this strategic-oriented interpretation. Like in Haley's work, for example, there was this one article which in a sense made me curious, but also a little bit distant, how a hypnotist and subject maneuver each other in one of his works, and so on. And said, this is this guy who always wants to be, so to speak, in the meta-complementary one-up position and things like that. That was my understanding.
Yeah.
When I read Ernie's books and Ernie's interpretation, you could say also, I had a different picture already, and it was more than, this guy is much more flexible and also interested in supporting maybe the autonomous process in people. But still it was so that I had this feeling he's always, in a sense, he wants to be one up or so. Maybe that could also be, but the way I experienced him then in encountering him has been different. Of course he was this guy, and when I asked him any kind of direct question I asked, the answer was always so that I was going into trance, so to speak, because it was never a direct answer. Never. I don't know.
I'm laughing because I thought if you were going to communicate with Erickson, you always had to be indirect. So I would make up these stories and he would always communicate very simply and directly.
And I was always trying to be very direct and I said, well, let me put it this way. And then, oh God, he told the story again. And I was, okay, I give up or so, which brought me into a much more flexible and creative mood of a state of consciousness. But I was so much, maybe that was also a different way how we approached him, because I was very structured and cognitively oriented at that time.
And I was really trancy. I was this kid, I was 19, and I had, just grew up in San Francisco in the late 60s, and Grateful Dead and hippies and meditation and
Haight-Ashbury and whatsoever.
Yeah, really. And I mean, I think I knew since I was a young boy that I wanted to be a psychotherapist. Some often say you just had to take one look at my family and realize somebody had to volunteer. And I carried this image of what a responsible therapist looked like. It was a conscious image, and it was basically an American Freud. This white guy about 50 with a beard and a pipe and looking very serious, and a jacket with patches on it. And I thought, wow, that's pretty rigid, but that's, if you're going to grow up and be responsible, that's what you look like. And I met Erickson through Gregory Bateson, who was a professor, and I was really intensely hanging out with Bandler and Gunther. And they met Erickson once they came back, and I just fell head over heels. They brought some tapes and some books, and I thought, something inside of me felt the sense of, this is why I'm here. This is like, I always wanted, I was interested in psychology, I was interested in therapy, but I think I was ambivalent because it seemed so serious and disconnected. And I thought, that's, if you're going to be a grown-up, you have to sort of be disconnected and to have intellectual understanding. And when I met Erickson, it was really like meeting Joda. And this feeling of this, he's a little guy. He was sparkling. He touched something in me immediately, and that image of the American Freud came flying out and smashed to like 1,000 pieces, never to be reassembled. And he was this guy that was speaking this idea that was so central in sort of the counterculture that I was a part of, just let go of the conscious mind, go into this deep, eternal place where everything is okay. And, as I was, connected to Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and the Grateful Dead and Bob Dylan and all these people. And Erickson seemed like totally acknowledging that world, but also carrying this other piece of this incredible way of entering into people's reality playfully but skillfully, And you know, the part that I think for so many people is just astonishing about Erickson, how he could take this very intensive negative pattern and in this humorous, playful, very skillful way would come in, and then it would pop open into some other way. So it was like so interesting. But you know, part of that Ericksonian idea at that time that Milton promoted, and most of us were true believers, was this sense that the unconscious is the good guy and can do no wrong. And so if you just could go off into trance, then all world problems would be solved, and et cetera, et cetera. So I was more in the trance field with him as my first connection to him. And it took a while for me to begin to have a feeling, if you spend all your time in trance, you just sort of end up spacing out. Or, you know, I tried to be in, like as a 21-year-old, have like intimate relationships, and I was just in a place where everything worked, you know, and so my girlfriends would say, what do you want to do tonight? And I'd say, well, everything's okay in the unconscious. And long story short, I started to come up against some of the limitations of thinking of trance as the cure-all for everything. And it was, I think, a much slower, longer path for me to get really connected to the social cognitive world and trusting in it, and thinking that the straight world really, that there was some value in that.